Okay, hi. Thanks for putting yourselves away from the garden where I would definitely be if I wasn't me. Sometimes it's really weird being oneself. But anyway, I just thought I would start. I'm told to finish at 4, so this is going to be extra short. Originally, I thought it was going to be 2 hours workshop. I am going to get you to draw. You are going to get a bit of paper, but it's going to be very minimal, okay? And if you want to carry on drawing on the boat, maybe you can do that. We'll do some sketching. It'd be so lovely to sketch. This is typical of my desk, a selection of books in process, splodges, mess. The writers here might recognize, the fact, I don't know, notebooks and whatever. But anyway, I thought I'd start with that just to get back into that kind of creative mode rather than the 3D mode we were in. And, I work 2D. I'm a Bridget Marzo, Bridget Strevens Marzo sometimes. I'm an artist. I draw, I paint, I illustrate, and I write. I write for kids mostly. Not totally. I write for them, I work for them in many different ways, and I am, in some ways, as all of us are, also a child, and there we are. So I'm going to talk a little bit about what the title I'm often given, which is author-illustrator, is about. Just to, one of these funny people that actually earns some kind of living working for children in that way, as opposed to being a teacher. I feel very privileged doing that. So I'm going to have to, the only thing is with this, is that when I move there, to move the slides, there's not a sort of, is there a little thing that means I can move? I can't. Okay, so I haven't got a very long arm, but I'm going to do this. A lot of people say, oh, how lovely, you're a children's book person, you're a children's book writer, illustrator. And yes, I feel incredibly privileged. There's a lot of hard work behind the scenes. Here I am on stage doing one of the things I really love doing, which is improvised drawing. And here's a bunch of us illustrators. Right in the middle is Axel Scheffler of the Gruffalo, who illustrated the Gruffalo, Julia Donaldson's Gruffalo. Between me and him is Beatrice Alemagna, who's an absolutely stunning French writer-illustrator. For those of you who are interested in psychology at all, her work is absolutely amazing. Benji Davis, others. We tend to be a really friendly and not competitive crowd in illustration. But what I really love doing, as here, is working with kids. This is a particularly active example. And I think we all do. I think one of the things that a lot of my artist, illustrator, author friends, the reason why they work in that world is because they love working with children, and to be debated whether that is about the fact that we never grew up or not, I don't know. But anyway, so I work for a very, very small, right up to about 6, 7. Really, as soon as words come in a big way, I hugely respect that kind of writing, but I love the chance to write with pictures. So I write the pictures, and then the text comes after very often. And that's often how I come up with creating books. And I love now, and this has taken me years to get here, is finding, working ways to work with children in groups. And go into school, so, sometimes sketch when I'm there. But I also love sketching, full stop. And this is something I have been doing privately, but I'm now working on a new project which is obsessing me, and one person here knows the struggle of that. And it comes out from a line, which is unusual for me, a piece of text first, which is, I was talking to my little godchild, Ash, who's about 5, and he loves saying the whole wide world. And he's always saying, did you know the whole wide world? And somehow or other, the idea came to me is, did you know that in the whole wide world, everybody in the whole wide world lived in a tummy once? Everybody. That's even if I don't know if there's any test tube babies here, but we all live. That's one thing we have in common, if nothing else. That's, in a way, a horrible thought when you think of some of the people that we have that in common with. But there we are. There's me reading pictures aged about 3. I was incredibly lucky then too. My dad earned his living as an artist, which meant a lot of compromises in his case. He came from East London, but he had a great knowledge of 19th century painting, particularly, a huge collection of old books. And so I lived a lot of the time, after I lived in my mother's tummy, I lived in his studio. He worked at home, and I was even given a little easel, and I'd just be kept quiet there, really, looking at books a lot of the time. So before I could read, that's what I was doing. And then, of course, when you've watched somebody draw, and you sort of live and breathe it, you draw quite early. He was a representational artist, so I think I was age 6.5, I think maybe, when I did this apple tree. I just put that in today because there's been an apple tree theme. And that's my cat, Freddie Whiskers, seen from behind. So, yes, I was 6, which for 6 is, it's almost too representational for 6. We'll talk about that a little later, about 14. I just found this drawing, which is an imaginative drawing. So for me, the struggle has always been between representation, drawing what I see, which I love doing, and imaginative drawing from my head. So I'm going to get you all to draw from your heads very briefly, but hopefully very instructively. This is a painting of my dad's of an apple tree. So that same tree was done by painting by my dad, which I gave to a hospital where he died in sort of thanks, because I thought it was a cheery thing to put in the waiting room. And there is my dad. I was, 20 when I painted that of my father. And you can see he was one of those traditional artists. He, oddly, there does not have his palette, but he actually did have an artist's palette and an upright easel. And, he was probably the last representative of that type of tradition in England, born in 1902, died in 1990, and, worked his way up. And there's a kind of fragmented portrait of my mother, which is a picture of his picture. Anyway, enough, I'm going backwards, and I totally agree with the whole circular discussion earlier. So we are going to have that. I will go quickly past that picture, done when I was at the École des Beaux-Arts after I left Cambridge. And you can see I studied art history, and I'd lost my childhood briefly during that moment, a sadness there, although perhaps a tenderness. I loved the connection and the movement of lines across things, and I was copying in the Louvre a lot as well, and copying Titian and other artists, and trying to get away from my father's technique. But then I had a child called Thomas, and, like Christopher Robin, poor thing, he landed in, out of the tummy, he landed in a world where there was this keen mother who used him as a subject, and we traveled, and I became a single mother, and we traveled across Europe, and I thought, I'm going to try and find a way to make a living with my ability to draw human beings, and then invent stories around him, based also on my childhood too. The stairs on the right is my aunt's, the stairs up to my aunt's house in the Batignolles in Paris. Anyway, so from there, the realism stayed, and you can sort of see when I was working for English and American publishers quite a few years ago, there's a connection to, I would not presume to be part of the classic, the great illustrators like, I won't go into that. We're going to do a few more. So yes, I use line, but, there I was working in France, and amazingly and wonderfully, through meeting the great creator of Elmer the elephant. Who knows Elmer, the patchwork elephant? Anyone know? Okay, I'm very happy to know he's a great fable teller, a great writer. And I had come up with a project, I missed that one, of a book series. And he saw it, and he said, you should contact Bayard. I met him because he could speak Catalan in the in the Bologna Book Fair, I heard an Englishman speaking Catalan. I thought, wow, my mother was Catalan. No Englishman can speak Catalan. My father struggled. Anyway, so there I was working for Bayard and doing very different things. This is an absolute institution in France. I know one person here knows Pomme d'Api. Does anyone else know? That's a revealer of where they come from. If they know Pomme d'Api, it is an absolute institution in France. It is a children's magazine, one of about 12 for different ages from 0 to 16. And the thing about those magazines, I think in England the equivalent was television in the 60s, like Blue Peter, where you would also make objects, create objects. In America, perhaps Highlights magazine, but the variety and art in the French magazines is stunning. There's no merchandising kind of cheap hard sell of, you know, various well-known Disney characters or whatever. And I even got to work on the creation of one of these monthly magazines where we worked with a child psychiatrist, and it was the plans for these magazines were incredibly careful, and a huge variety of illustrators. So these are games. Originally, some of them were games from Pomme d'Api, and they're graphic games. They're all graphic games. In the same magazine, there would be really good quality comic. There'd be a long story with a hero, as they would say, and a short story. And basically, all of that is a fundamental part of the childhood of most French children. And also, some of these magazines get sold in Italy and in Hong Kong and other parts of the world. The one place you don't see them is in England, or in the States, actually. This is an introduction. I'm going really fast now because I'm conscious of time. You know, 101 different ways to draw an elephant, okay? We're going to look at that a bit more. We know that a little bit from art history, but we don't know it enough. There's one famous artist there. I won't have time to get you to figure out who's who. One of them is a very famous English, the first children's laureate, Quentin Blake is there, not with a very typical drawing of his, actually, but right in the middle. Yes, and David McKee, Patchwork Elephant, bottom right. So, yes, I've got, we'll go back slightly to that picture. Yes, I'll talk about this briefly, only because in a lot of children's books now, particularly the ones I see in England, less so in the States, there's a lot of rules, which a lot of us are, you know, having to struggle with this. The rules of the marketplace, the belief that you have to do cute, wonderfully cute, to make people want to buy the book so the publisher can make money on it. But, you know, here are two examples of books that are not cute, and I'm showing them because I really want to inspire people to think that if you are tempted, that you might do a book about two people splitting up. Now, one of these crazy quarrels between Caleb and Kate means that he slams the door and refuses to talk to her. This is a book called Caleb and Kate, and it's about an argument. And he goes off into the woods, she's in a huff, and then, by chance, a witch randomly walks past him, turns him into a dog because she doesn't like the look of him. And then he comes back to the house, not realizing he's a dog, and spends 3/4 of the book as a dog, adoring and apologizing to the lovely Kate, who is absolutely distressed and mortified that her husband has walked out on her, until the robbers come, and he, as a dog, saves her from the robbers, cuts himself, and suddenly magically turns back into the husband. I just love the fact that, you know, we have stories like that. And of course, Ferdinand. Who knows Ferdinand? Anyone know Ferdinand? This is a great work of art. This ought to be known and be part of art history. This is not another subject. It's called Ferdinand the Bull, and it's actually about a bull who doesn't want to fight like the other bulls. And so not Ferdinand, he doesn't go off and fight. And it's a great tale of really pacifism. I mean, I think you read that book and you would never want to believe in war. Ferdinand the Bull, you have to find this book. And I wish there were more books like that, done in the 30s with a sense of the Spanish Civil War coming, I believe. So anyway, so yes, I mean, when you actually have to make a living, I sort of ended up going all the way around, away from what my dad had to do, back to where he was in terms of having to make compromises with publishers as an illustrator. And here's one of them. Although the first part of the process, when you're thinking of a story and you're thinking bird's eye view and you're writing a story, as I will do, show you later, I find very exciting and is quite abstract. So I'm coming up with a whole sequence of images based on a text from someone else in this particular case. And actually the story is just about two cars racing with a sort of vroom vroom through a book. And I thought, well, there's nothing that I can illustrate in that. I have to create my own story in the pictures. And so basically there's a whole bunch of characters, and the smallest one wins, so that does come from another structure. But, going from something like that for the English and American publishers to a French publisher that asked me to do comptines, nursery rhymes. The great joy in that was actually doing each is an actual book of one rhyme. So Frère Jacques is a whole book. So again, I had to interpret the story in full, mostly in nursery rhyme books. As I showed you earlier, this is where it should have been, this one, you get vignettes in English books. So you try to cram a nursery rhyme on 1 page or 2 pages. Again, though, you're putting your own interpretation there so that, I don't think I've seen another Three Little Piggy one with a bottle being served by a little mouse, etc. Incidentally, as I was saying to someone yesterday, I've done quite a lot of talks about the history of illustration, and one of them, Mice, Mothers and Others, is all about the representation of mice and mothers in children's books. Fascinating subject, a whole other talk. Today, though, I'm leading you and trying to give you some very different views of not only my work, but other people's work, to lead to this. Because this is actually rather interesting. I have got time to show you. This is going to springboard us into what we are all going to do. And I won't expect anyone, unless they're incredibly able to draw realistically, to come up in like 5 minutes with realistic drawings. But basically, this is from a book by Scott McCloud. Anyone come across a book called Understanding Comics? It's absolutely fascinating, and it's about the language that you need to find when you're doing sequential narrative, when you're talking, when you're telling a story visually across pages, whether it's across frames in the case of comic books or pages in the case of picture books. It's a similar thing. Of course, storyboarding for film is similar too, but you can see there's language is represented by the smiley face, reality by the sort of photographic, and then, I mean, the drawings themselves are not great, but they show you that you can sort of place, I don't know, Delacroix just to the right of the reality in terms of being textural and not totally realistic. Matisse going somewhere up towards what he calls the picture plane, the object in the picture plane where shapes, colors, and lines can be themselves. Matisse goes somewhere between that reality and picture plane kind of area. But when you're thinking narratively, you're trying to think schematically and trying to find a schematic kind of vision of a face which is a mask for the child or the reader, actually, of any age, to identify with the character is one of the struggles and interesting issues for anyone interested in this world. And even, I would love people to be more aware of that, that when we think of what narrative art is in the 19th century, the art pompier in France, or, you can talk about Poussin. I mean, I studied these people as an art history student. They were narrative storytellers. There's no place for them now except in film, and arguably in children's books and comic books and graphic novels. Anyway, so I came up with one system, and after doing many kinds of different things, my struggle has been to whittle down, to simplify, simplify, simplify. And so my latest book out with the Tate in England, Tis Not's Big Drawer, is, I'll show you a bit more of it, is about a cat and a donkey, a cat called Tis and a donkey called Ot, who draw and paint their way through an adventure. Here is Tis stealing Ot's brush. Ot is a slow, low-energy painter. Tis is a fast-energy scribbler. Tis starts with ideas. Ot starts with splodges. And when I taught for many years in art school, I noticed, and I was saying this to the sculptor earlier, that, you know, half of the people here were creating from an idea before they actually touch the material. And about the other half of people, I didn't do a proper survey, was starting with the stuff and seeing what that stuff was making accidentally, and then kind of reading into it from the stuff. Do you understand what I'm saying? So that, and I see this, and there's no right way to do this. Some people have an overall idea. I often think it's like the people who are very good at plot, and they come up with a sort of idea of structure, and then they then go and they've sorted it out, as the sculptor was saying he does. He has an idea, and then the execution is mere execution, and then this other bunch are struggling with material, and the material gives them a message to create something with. And I see it in very small children. I'd love to know from the psychoanalysts amongst us here if they have seen this at all, but the brick building, there will be a child that say, I'll make a house out of bricks, and another child is just playing, and they'll say, oh, that's a house, there we are. So, again, sorry about this, in my rush, it's gone. This is all to show you gesture. So once you've got an idea, or this is just arbitrary, this is another artist, Marc Simont, whose work I adore, just because it's not the sort of thing you normally see in children's books these days. He did this in the early 60s, the Philharmonic gets dressed, the story of a whole orchestra getting dressed, but you don't know who they are. They're just waking up in the morning, and only at the end do you realize their work is to play, and they play beautifully, which for me is one of the best lines in a children's book. And I think it's also what we all do when we're happy and creating. Anyway, more gestures from me. Finding character through gesture is one of the things. And here is a gesture from a 3-year-old, no, actually slightly older. I was working with doing something that we will now shortly do, which for me was a huge, I provide a sort of terrain for kids with a story. I'll tell, kids do love being told stories, but then it's their turn to put their characters into some sort of common terrain that I've created for them. Or not. Oh, gesture again. So two roughs of elephants. One works for me and one doesn't. And the one that works, of course, is similar to this guy, whose name I did not, alas, write. And that is the connection between the small and the small child, the small baby elephant and the mother, as it were. So the first one is too static. They're looking at each other, but, anyway. So interaction in this case with my two characters, Tis and Ot, who are having that joy of playing about and splodging. But, as a line drawer, Tis, the cat, writing zip or we, he's much more progressive and working in slow, steady, thought-based ways, rather than just making complete mess and then thinking, what is that? Anyway, so that's the book. Now, okay, take you a little bit through this to give you, that's from the book at the very end as something that I like to work with, and it gives you a little clue as to what we might be doing now. I've worked in, this is in actually what is called Bedlam, the hospital now in the south of London, but these are not people, all of them from Bedlam. It's a mix of people who come in for workshops, and we were doing colour mixing, which is what I thought I would love to do here, but we don't have time for that. There were children there. These are done by children in the front, but there was also an architect. There were all kinds of people mixing colour, and then workshops. So a mix of gesture and mask creation is something that I really wanted to focus on, and given time is limited, we are going to do that right now. And I'm going to stop boring you with all of these pictures. I have so many more, so it's very good I've been given a short time thing. We have, I don't know, is Sarah here to help distribute paper, and I will do it. Take one and pass it on, you know, Joyce Grenfell.